So far as architecture is concerned, Norman influence on the culture of England began sometime before the military conquest, responsible for the most indelible date in our history. This scene from the Bayeux Tapestry depicts Westminster Abbey, designed by Norman-trained masons around 1050, 16 years before the events of Senlac Field. It was unmistakably of the style which we now call Norman Romanesque. But while the conquest of 1066 did not of itself introduce Romanesque to England, it was unquestionably the catalyst for an intensive construction program of great religious and secular buildings, the scale and quality of which the English had hardly known. The conqueror's immediate post-invasion priority was the physical and psychological domination of the captive land and its peasant populace. They achieved this purpose by the construction of powerful stone fortresses. Best known, perhaps, of these surviving donjons, or places of lordship as they were called, is the White Tower, built by William I to control the city of London. Though much altered through the centuries, it is still a potent symbol of the new dynasty's intention to remain and rule indefinitely. A message sustained within by the magnificent solidity of the Chapel of St. John, which offers the same promise of permanence. In the event, of course, most of the great Norman castles proved less durable than their builders must have believed, and the spectacular ruins of those such as Ludlow in Shropshire and Richmond in Yorkshire are now relegated to the status of the picturesque. But the better preserved Hedingham Castle in Essex, built for the De Vere family in the reign of Henry I, still offers a kind of blind defiance, its high, smooth walls relieved only by arrow slots, a few small windows at the upper levels, and the occasional, almost grudging concession to surface decoration. The interior, though not without grandeur or technical accomplishment, isn't much more hospitable, and the inconvenient and enclosed conditions of life within the castle keep led eventually to the provision of more open and comfortable quarters centering on the Great Hall, such as that at 12th century Oakham in Leicestershire. This hall is of stone, but elsewhere it might well have been built of wood. Only fragmentary buildings of timber construction survive from the 12th century, but one exceptional agricultural building, the Barley Barn at Cressing Temple in Essex, remains to show us the quality of such works. Almost as rare as wooden structures are the few surviving stone houses, belonging to wealthier merchants, members of the Jewish communities, and citizens' guilds, such as these at Lincoln, where there is also to be found a bigger house of stone. The House of God gave the Romanesque artist far greater scope for the full expression of his talents than domestic or military buildings could ever offer. Though it should be understood that affairs of church and state in Norman England were closely intertwined, as the design of Lincoln Cathedral's west front suggests. Lincoln's first bishop participated personally in the Battle of Hastings, and so may be seen as a soldier as well as a priest, and the large defensive slots or machicolations that he built into the deeply recessed main entrances of his church confirm his concern for security. But few great churches, not even Winchester, begun in the relatively insecure days of the late 1070s, allow for such extreme defensive measures. Conceived to rival the size of St. Peter's in Rome, Winchester was to incorporate all the most grandiose features of the new Romanesque architecture of the continent, and the surviving transepts still convey the majestic scale of the building. But they show more besides. The design of the elevation is typical of the high Romanesque style created in the 1060s and 70s in Normandy and England. It is built with walls so massively thick that a passageway runs within them. The length of the wall is divided by tall shafts, and within each bay, the arches of the 3 stories are repeated. Aisles, galleries, and clear-story windows. Each of these larger units is built up from smaller components, columns and half-columns. arches and capitals. And in turn, the smaller units and wall surfaces themselves are constructed of uniformly sized blocks of stone. The result of this process of design is a consistently articulated whole that is at once unified and visually arresting. An achievement made all the more remarkable by the fact that the design was not created by the direct equivalent of a modern architect, but by the masons engaged upon the building's construction. Through such direct experience, the design process was continually refined, and the bare simplicity of Winchester rapidly developed into the rich style of the reign of Henry I, a transformation that can be seen in progress in the church at Ely. Here, as elsewhere, the work proceeded without benefit or hindrance of large-scale designs, carefully worked out on paper. And though the masons must have had a clear mental picture of the effect they wished to achieve, this was susceptible to modification during construction. The only finished statement was the building itself. So the simple geometric shapes and unmolded arches of the initial design gave way to more ambivalent forms, more English than Norman, and perhaps owing something to Anglo-Saxon precedent. The nave at Ely is one of the great works of English medieval architecture, dignified yet full of liveliness, subtlety, and gracefulness. Contemporary, but representing the opposite pole of design, was the cathedral at Durham, founded to house the shrine of Cuthbert, the great Anglo-Saxon saint. Here the aim was not sophisticated elegance, but a forceful restatement of the program of Romanesque architecture. The key to this restatement was the decision to cover the building not with a wooden ceiling, but with a vault of stone. A vault with diagonal ribs, such as was to become a constituent feature of the later Gothic style. But also important aesthetically is a change in proportions, creating a lofty ground story supported by colossal piers. These columns, with their surfaces sharply cut with bold geometric patterns, are among the most powerful forms in English architecture of any era. Similarly effective are other details of the design. Mouldings that give a plastic depth to the wall surfaces, and crisply chevroned outlines to arches and vaulting ribs. The architectural form and texture created by the masons determined the basic artistic character of these great buildings. But an essential complement was the work of other craftsmen, among whom were the carvers or sculptors. The remarkable capitals in Durham Castle's beautiful 11th century chapel are notable examples of the sculptor's contribution, enlivening an otherwise unadorned space with primitive vitality and charm. More remarkable still is the celebrated series of capitals in the crypt at Canterbury Cathedral. Here, fabulous beasts, strange jugglers, and curious creatures locked in combat are assembled in an amazing celebration of the diversity of life. By contrast, the carvings on the portals leading into the church at Ely are of a more directly religious nature. Around the monk's entrance, two abbots kneel in prayer, while dragons engage in fierce struggle. The whole perhaps symbolizes monastic prayer as a means of escape from the snares and strife of the secular world. Another entrance is surmounted by a magnificent representation of Christ, seated in majesty as judge of the world, flanked by angels. It is an allusion to the gateway of heaven, which none may pass without being judged for his past deeds, and at the same time proclaims that those entering the building are entering an image of heaven itself. The church as an image of religious realities was sometimes emphasized further by wall paintings, a technique used to particular effect in small churches to create a kind of sacred theatre where the worshippers are imaginatively present amid the events of their redemption. The 12th century church of Hardham in Sussex has one of the most complete surviving schemes. Executed in fresco technique with a limited range of earth colors, the paintings depict mainly biblical events: the fall of Adam and Eve, the nativity of Christ, the flight into Egypt, and others. But there are allusions to more contemporary religious events, such as the appearance of St. George to the Crusaders at the Battle of Antioch in 1098. The creation of such a dramatic and intimate effect in large churches must have been more difficult, but by carving and painting the screen wall of the choir, it was possible to provide similar sacred enclosures with compelling narrative content, as in these famous scenes of Christ arriving at Bethany and the raising of Lazarus from the choir screen at Chichester Cathedral. Another extensive area available for decoration was the flat wooden ceiling, and that at Ely, though a 19th century creation, gives a vivid impression of a lost class of Romanesque work. The painting of surfaces and architectural details must have modified these interiors profoundly from what we see today, except where a rare survival, such as at Kempley in Gloucestershire, provides us with a glimpse of their astonishing density and intriguing ambiguity of form. But this complex art form did not capture the imagination of all 12th century patrons. The new Cistercian order of monks regarded the visual arts as a distraction from inward contemplation and an irrelevant waste of money. The Cistercians arrived in England in 1128, and their first churches were small and severe, but an enormous growth in their popularity soon brought the need for larger buildings to cope with increased numbers of converts. At Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire, the church of the mid-12th century shows that in these larger buildings, the Cistercians were yet able to achieve a monumental simplicity and gravity through an adaptation of features from the order's native Burgundy to the indigenous Anglo-Norman tradition. Today, we can appreciate this architecture much as it was intended to be seen, for it was the law of the order that all wall paintings, colored glass, sculpture, and rich fittings were to be banished from their churches. Other monastic orders were less inhibited. The Benedictines of Malmesbury, though they too adopted the simple pointed arch favored by their austere contemporaries at Fountains, did not respond enthusiastically to the aesthetic of restraint, and a robust overlay of molded ornament was freely applied to the church interior. And outside, in Malmesbury's great porch, was created one of the most splendid ensembles of English Romanesque sculpture, with Christ enthroned in majesty, flanked by the apostles and angels, and beyond this, an outer arch of exquisite medallions telling the whole history of man's salvation from the Old and New Testaments. The builders of Nottinghamshire's Southwell Minster appear to have been equally attracted to the textual exuberance of the indigenous tradition. And even the Knights of the Temple, founded under Cistercian aegis, abandoned the simplicity of their earliest churches, such as this at Shipley in Kent, to build their lavish headquarters in London. The round church, inspired by the Holy Sepulchre and the dome on the site of the temple in Jerusalem, combined Romanesque features with elements borrowed from the new Gothic style of northern France that would soon become the succeeding European and English architectural style. The purer Romanesque values still had much to offer late 12th century patrons and builders. And in a final burst of energy, many of the churches built in the style's earlier and more formative years were treated to a program of opulent embellishment. Architectural ornament was piled on ornament. The wall paintings grew in richness of hue and gilding. Colored glass, metalwork and enamels, ceramics, ivories, and textiles. combined with the power of formal space to create a total artistic expression, which the modern observer may only attempt to piece together from fragments left over from the wreckage of time, and strive to recapture the primordial vision of Romanesque art.